The rules of the conspiracy theorized by Trotsky, do they only imply the concealment of one's own political identity, or could they include the recourse to false denouncements, in order to spread confusion and chaos in the enemy camp and to make more difficult the identification of the clandestine network struggling to topple Stalin's regime? In other words, do the rules of the conspiracy include just the rigorous protection of private information, or do they also allow the use of disinformation? It's not just the American journalist Anne Louise Strong, sympathetic to the government, who raises such suspicions. 256 In the secret report itself it speaks of false charges and provocations realized by authentic Trotskyists, thereby carrying out their revenge, but also careerists without a conscience willing to clear the way by using the most contemptible means. 257 Noteworthy is an episode that takes place when the assassination of Kirov is made public. Most reactions, according to Andrew Smith, who at the time worked in the Kuznetsov Elektrozavod factory, are of shock and concern in relation to the future. But there's also those who express regret that it wasn't Stalin who was shot. Later an assembly is held, during which the workers are encouraged to denounce enemies or possible enemies of Soviet ruling. Smith recalls his surprise at how, during the debate, the dissident group he was in contact with proved to be the most active in attacking the opposition and deviationists, and seeking the most severe measures against them. 258 Indicative as well as an episode that occurs outside the USSR, but could help in understanding what occurs inside that country. When General Alexander M. Orlov, a former high-level collaborator with the NKVD, is accused by the journalist Louis Fisher of having participated in the liquidation of anti-Stalinist communists during the Spanish Civil War, he responds with a false revelation that it was his accuser, in fact, who was a spy in service to Moscow. 259 In the Soviet Union of the 1930s, we have seen the opposition infiltrating the repressive apparatus at the highest levels. It would be very strange if, after having achieved this objective, it limited itself to obeying Stalin's orders. Disinformation carries the double advantage of obstructing the machinery of repression and redirecting it against an especially hated enemy. It's an integral part of war, and that's what it's about, at least judging by Trotsky's argument in July of 1933, when he considers the counter-revolutionary civil war carried out by the Stalinist bureaucracy to be already underway, and which culminated in the infamous annihilation of the Leninist Bolsheviks. Therefore it's necessary to be aware of the new situation. The slogan for the reform of the CPSU doesn't make sense anymore. A head-on struggle is imposed. The party and the International led by Stalin, now on their last leg, can only bring misfortune and nothing but misfortune to the world proletariat. On the opposing side, the authentic revolutionaries certainly can be inspired in their actions by petty bourgeois pacifists. 260 There can be no doubt, only with violence can the bureaucracy be forced to return power to the hands of the proletarian vanguard. 261 Hitler's rise to power for Trotsky doesn't mean that unity is necessary, in the aim of confronting the enormous danger which looms, starting from Germany. It means that they can't stop halfway in the struggle against a power, Stalinism, which had led to the defeat of the German and international proletariat. As you can see, it's the very leader of the opposition who speaks of civil war within the party that he in part led during the October Revolution and in the first years of Soviet Russia. Before us is the topic which constituted the starting thread of the investigation by a Russian historian who is a convinced and self-declared Trotskyist, author of a monumental and multi-volume work, dedicated precisely to the detailed reconstruction of this civil war. He speaks, regarding Soviet Russia, of a preventive civil war carried out by Stalin against those who had organized to topple him. Even outside the USSR, this civil war takes shape and at times intensifies within the front that fought against Franco. In fact, referencing Spain from 1936 to 1939, he speaks not of one, but two civil wars. 262 With great intellectual honesty and taking advantage of new and rich documentary material available thanks to the opening of Russian archives, The author cited here reaches this conclusion: the Moscow trials weren't a crime without motive nor in cold blood, but more accurately Stalin's reaction during an acute political struggle. 263 In arguing against Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who paints the victims of the purges as a bunch of rabbits, the Russian Trotskyist historian cites a pamphlet which in the 1930s called for the Kremlin to be cleared of the fascist dictator and his clique. He then comments, including from the perspective of Russian legislation in force today, this pamphlet would be judged as a call for the violent overthrow of the government. 264 In conclusion, far from being an irrational and senseless outbreak of violence, the bloody terror carried out by Stalin is in fact the only way he could defeat the resistance of the true communist forces. The party of the executed, is how he defined those targeted, in an analogy to the expression used to identify the French Communist Party, the principal force of anti-fascist resistance and privileged target of Hitler's terror. Point 265 Thus, Stalin is compared to Hitler, highlighting the fact that the communist and French partisans didn't limit themselves to a passive or non-violent resistance while opposing the latter.